Hi, everybody, and welcome back. So, today we are continuing with the book. Okay, so we left off where Harold was about to leave for Lesotho. He was going to take Hennes along with him, but Hennes died in a car accident. George Hill from Australia was thus the chosen one. Harold talks about the conditions in Lesotho and also the beauty of the landscape. This is very truthful. And he says him and George worked as hard there as they did on the Hills farm, doing whatever they could, mixing cement, repairing schools. And from everything I heard locally, this is indeed also true. Harold was, and likely still is, very much loved in Lesotho. An interview was arranged for Harold to promote his cause in Lesotho, and all went well until the subject of Diana came up, and the subject of his drug use and the page 3 girl. Harold had the red mist descend on him once again, and it went from bad to worse. He says him and George drank gallons of beer that night, and he smoked a shopping bag full of weed. In part 45, he tells about going to Cape Town, staying at the home of the Consulate General. They wanted to socialize a bit, but did not know many people. Harry then remembered a girl he met before, Chelsea, and lo and behold, the number he had for her still worked. He invited her to a barbecue, and she brought a girlfriend and her brother. He talks about how almost oblivious Chelsea was to his title, and he appreciated that she did not ask about his family. He invited them along on a trip to Botswana, and Chelsea and her friend agreed. Eventually, the time came for George to go back to Australia and Chelsea and her friend to go home. After his friends left, he met up with a film company doing a wildlife documentary. He asked whether he could join them, and an agreement was reached on condition that he does his share of the work. He talks a little about the couple he was with, Tej and Mike, and I think that although there were the odd word or sentence here or there which identifies Harold the way we know him or thought we knew him, this part 46, is the first time where I can hear the real Harry's voice. No flowery speech, nothing over the top, just pure happiness and very authentic. And of course, most of it, if not all, can actually be verified. He then went to see Chelsea again. In Africa, no one cared, and they moved about unnoticed. But as soon as they arrived at Heathrow, he says they were packed. He told her to treat it like a chronic illness, one which just has to be managed. Chelsea was not impressed, but Harold had to go do the entrance exams for the Royal Military Academy at Sandhurst. He passed, but his report date was months away. Chelsea invited him back to Cape Town and to meet her parents. Now, when I actually read Harold's words to you next, I want you to bear in mind that he wrote this years later and as a man who is married to someone else. And in your mind's eye, I want you to draw or highlight the differences between what he had and could have had with Chelsea and what he now has with Mog. Because, in my opinion, that could make an entire video on its own. Okay, so he writes, I did, and I liked them instantly. They were impossible not to like. They enjoyed funny stories, gin and tonics, good food. Her father was bear-sized, broad-shouldered, cuddly, but also a definite alpha male. Her mother was petite an amazing listener, and a frequent bestower of epic hugs. I didn't know what the future held, but I thought if you designed in-laws from the ground up, you couldn't do much better than these guys. How terribly sad, really, knowing what we know now. He then talks about Charles and Camilla's wedding, all the delays, how he and William made peace with the marriage, etc. Just before Harold was to go into the army, him and William joined an unofficial training session with the British Special Boat Service, during which he fell on his left knee and impaled it on a fixed bolt sticking out of the floor, and thus his entry into the army was postponed. Then he talks about two fancy dress parties, one which William hosted with an out of Africa theme, and here he finally introduces Catherine, although he calls her Kate in the book. He talks about how the two of them laughed together and mocked William's costume, and how he liked to make her laugh. He says she was sweet, carefree, and kind, and he hoped that one day the four of them, William, Kate, Chelsea, and him, could laugh together. He talks about going to a store to find a costume for the other party, I think it was a birthday party, and decided on the Nazi uniform. He thought it was funny, and at the party nobody noticed or said anything, but someone at the party did see an opportunity and sold the photographs to a newspaper. And then, obviously, it all blew up. Charles, however, accepted Harold's explanation, namely that in hindsight he recognizes his mistake, but at the time he just did not think. Yes, he also mentions that William and Kate thought it was extremely funny, but never mind. Charles called it the foolishness of youth. However, all of a sudden, there were also stories that he may be barred from Sandhurst, and he then went and asked his father to help and intervene. Charles sent him to a holy man, the chief rabbi. He had a long conversation with the rabbi, but basically the rabbi condemned what he did, but understood that it was not intended to be malicious. Towards the end of part one, namely parts 53 to 58 of part one, it is all about the army, his training, and so forth. As I've never been in the army or involved with anyone who had been, I honestly cannot comment other than to say I'm sure Harold was steering the ship in writing all of this. It is rather deadpan, matter of fact, and only mildly interesting. The only minute detail I picked up on was that for security reasons he was allowed to keep his cell phone and would text Chelsea at night and then lend his phone to other guys to text their girlfriends. He talks about his passing out parade when the Queen inspected the troops and how she stopped in front of him and said, "Oh, hello." He talks about the after party with Chelsea being his date. Now, part two of the book is titled Bloody but Unbowed. It starts with him being deployed in 2007, or he was supposed to be deployed, and the reaction to it. He talks about messages from insurgent leaders and the British public. However, 2 months after his deployment was announced in the newspapers, intelligence was received that Harold's photograph was being distributed among a group of Iraqi snipers. So the mission had become too dangerous for Harold and everyone else in his platoon. Again, and this time rightly so, the press was blamed for announcing his deployment. Prince Charles issued a statement saying Harold was very disappointed. But, according to Harold, he wasn't only disappointed, he was livid. He says he talked it over with Chelsea, who was on the one hand relieved that he wasn't going to Iraq, but she also knew that he really wanted to go. He spoke to William about it, blah, blah, blah. Of course, he blames his disappointment and ensuing anger for him going on a bender, going to multiple clubs and parties. Now comes the part where I'm not sure whether it is true or Harold's paranoia. According to him, the paparazzi somehow knew he was in a bad place. According to Harold, they deliberately began hitting him with their cameras. Now, why would they do that? Their cameras are their livelihood and an expensive piece of equipment. But let's read on. According to Harold, they would brush, smack, or just plainly wallop him, trying to incite him. He equates these photographers to terrorists. He talks about how after one incident, and we all know about that one incident, we have the photographs, they devised a new plan when leaving a pub. They would pull into an alleyway behind the pub or a parking garage, and he would get into the boot of the car so that he could leave unseen. Then he talks about the concert he and William hosted to commemorate the 10th anniversary of Diana's death, and nothing much there. Then in part 4, as I started reading, I thought, here it comes, a young man with problems since childhood. There must be a day or week when the pretense can no longer be upheld. There has to be a breaking point. He was in Botswana with Chelsea, and they went to stay with Tej and Mike, and Harry's friend Addie was there too. Harold says it felt like taking Chelsea to meet mom and dad. He tells how one afternoon they got ready to go for a walk, and Tej was nagging him to wear a hat and sunscreen. And as she was nagging him, he said, "Okay, Mom." He tells how everybody stopped in their tracks and how shocked everyone was, and how he thereafter continued to call her Mom, but never Mum like he called Diana. This is a bit crazy, but let's move on. Although it was a good visit, there was also stress. Stress because of his heavy drinking. According to Harold, nobody said anything, but he says he knew something had to be done. And as soon as he got back to Britain, he went to see his commanding officer. Harold wanted to get back into operations. After discussions, the colonel came up with a plan. Afghanistan. He offered Harold the chance to go to Afghanistan as a forward air controller. But first, obviously, he had to go through some training. Harold was then sent to RAF Leeming in Yorkshire Dales. But after this, Harold still had to get combat training, as him going to one of the usual training areas would likely result in it leaking again. The colonel sent Harold to Sandringham, Granny's country estate, to train there. All of this was obviously hard for Chelsea. She felt unseen and, I guess, ignored. Harold's response was that this is what he wanted to do, and if it meant there was less heart and soul left for anything else, well, then he was sorry. Nice guy, huh? No wonder they didn't last. Anyway, guys, so that's it for today. We will continue tomorrow to battle through this book. And as you all know, the The real salacious parts are only coming up, so hang in there. If you haven't read the book yourself, at least you get all the finer details on this channel. And then tomorrow or Wednesday, we will also have that promised discussion on something which has nothing to do with the book. So until then, please take good care of yourself. Bye.